Duke dumped his poor bride for his mistress until she walked down the aisle and gasps filled the church. St. Jude's Parish Church had been standing at the edge of Bath's upper town since 1623, and in all of those 154 years it had hosted christenings, funerals, scandals barely disguised as weddings, and at least 2 events that the official church record described simply as irregular proceedings without further elaboration. It had never hosted anything quite like this. The pews were full to the last seat, every matron of consequence, every debutante of the current season, every lord and baronet and second son who had received an invitation to the wedding of the breathtakingly handsome and renowned Arthur Vance, Duke of Westcliff, had come, and most of them had come less for the ceremony than for what they had heard was about to happen within it. News in Bath travelled the way water travelled downhill, fast, without asking permission, and finding every crack. The news had been that the Duke was marrying Lady Eleanor Ashford. The more interesting news, arrived 2 days prior and distributed through drawing rooms and card parties with the focused energy of people who understood its value, was why he was marrying Lady Eleanor Ashford, which was to say, instead of the woman he had been quietly betrothed to for the preceding 6 months. That woman, the discarded one, the replaced one, was named Clara. Just Clara, as far as most of the congregation knew. A modest governess from somewhere unremarkable. No family of note. No fortune. No particular claim on anyone's attention, which was precisely, the Duke had apparently decided, the problem. He had said this, or something to this effect, in a letter that had been read by at least 14 people who had not been intended to read it, because letters of that nature always were. He had called her, the phrase that had lodged itself in Bath's collective memory and would not be dislodged, a penniless, common nuisance, and he had said it in writing, which was either very foolish or very confident, and time was currently determining which. Arthur Vance stood at the altar in a coat of dark velvet that had cost more than most men's annual income, with the posture of a man who had decided something and intended to be seen deciding it. He was, objectively, extremely handsome, in the severe, architectural way of a man who had been told this his whole life and had neither been helped nor particularly comforted by the information. His expression was the expression he wore in public, composed, certain, slightly cold. The expression of a man who believed the current arrangement of the world was correct. Beside him, in the front pew reserved for family, sat Lady Eleanor Ashford in a gown that was aggressively expensive and a smile that had not quite reached its eyes all morning. She was beautiful and knew it in the deliberate way, the way that required maintenance and attention and the constant awareness of being watched. She was watching the door. Everyone was watching the door. The flowers were lilies, which filled the vaulted space with the thick, sweet, slightly funerary scent that lilies produce in enclosed spaces. The light came through stained glass in columns of amber and blue. The vicar stood at the altar with the patient expression of a man who had presided over irregular proceedings before and had made his peace with this. The door opened. Not in the tentative, apologetic way of someone late. In the way of someone who had chosen their moment. The gasp that moved through the congregation was not a polite sound. It was involuntary, the sound of 200 people having their expectation replaced by something entirely different simultaneously, which is the kind of thing that bypasses good manners entirely. Clara walked down the aisle of St. Jude's Parish Church in a gown of ivory silk satin that caught the stained glass light and threw it back in silver. The fabric had been woven with silver thread, real silver, the kind that required a specific source and a specific budget, and it moved with her with the particular authority of something made for its purpose. On her head, placed with precision rather than ostentation, sat a diamond tiara. Not a decorative approximation. Diamonds, set in white gold, belonging to a lineage so old and so carefully absent from public life that half the congregation did not immediately recognize the crest worked into its setting. The other half did. Clara's face, and this was the detail that would be discussed over the most tea, in the most drawing rooms, for the longest afterward, was not the face of a woman in pain. It was not the face of a woman arriving to beg or to weep or to make a scene of herself for the satisfaction of witnesses. It was the face of a woman who found the entire situation genuinely, privately amusing, and had decided not to conceal this. She walked the length of the aisle at a pace that said she had somewhere to be but was not hurrying for anyone, and she did not look at Lady Eleanor, and she did not look at the congregation. She looked at Arthur. Arthur looked back at her. "Hello, lovely. If you're enjoying this tale of hidden beauty and unexpected love, I'd be so grateful for a like or subscribe. It helps me bring you more stories where pain shatters and true character shines through. And if you'd like, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every note, and your presence makes these stories come alive." His jaw was the jaw of a man whose composure had just made contact with information it was not equipped to process, and the result was a stillness so complete that the vicar, standing 2 feet away, later described it as the most absolute silence I have witnessed in a living man who was not in prayer. Clara reached the altar. She stopped. She looked at the flowers. "Lilies," she said, to no one in particular, in a voice pitched with the natural carrying quality of a woman who had spent years in rooms full of people louder than her and had learned to be heard without raising her volume. How original. Though I will say the arrangements are rather sparse for a duke's occasion. One would expect more from a man of your resources, Arthur. The florist clearly wasn't told to reach. Several people in the nearby pews produced sounds they immediately tried to disguise as coughs. Arthur said nothing. He was still processing. Clara turned to look at him fully, and whatever was in her expression, the amusement, the clarity, the complete and devastating absence of the shame he had apparently expected, it did something to his face that Lady Eleanor, watching from the pew, did not like at all. "Who," Arthur said, when he had located his voice, "are you?" It was, Clara thought, a genuinely interesting question. Given that he had offered to marry her 6 months ago, spent those 6 months in her company, and had then decided in writing that she was a penniless common nuisance, the question had several possible interpretations. "Lady Clara Sterling," said her brother Richard, from the aisle, where he had been walking 3 paces behind her and where he now stood with the calm, settled presence of a man who had been waiting for this moment with considerable patience. He was holding a document, several documents, bound in formal ribbon, bearing seals that the vicar, who was familiar with official papers, went noticeably still upon seeing. Sole heir to the House of Sterling. Daughter of the late Viscount Sterling and his wife, the Lady Margaret, of the Cornish Sterlings. Richard presented the papers to the vicar with the courtesy of a man completing a straightforward administrative task. "The lineage documentation, if you need it verified." The vicar looked at the papers. He looked at Clara's tiara. He looked at Arthur. The church had gone completely quiet in the specific way that happens when 200 people all stop breathing slightly. Clara adjusted one glove, a small, unhurried movement, and looked at Arthur with the expression of a woman who has done something she has been planning carefully and is now interested to see how it lands. It had, by any observable measure, landed. 2. Arthur Vance had been a duke since the age of 24, which meant he had spent 14 years in the condition of being the most important person in most rooms he entered. He had learned to carry this with him the way a person carries height, not thinking about it, simply being it, the constant subtle adjustment of the world around him to account for his presence. He was not, currently, the most important person in this room. He was becoming rapidly aware of this. "Arthur," Lady Eleanor said, from the pew, in a voice that was attempting authority and producing something closer to agitation. "This is utterly. The flowers," Clara said, without looking at her, "really are quite sparse. I count 3 arrangements for the entire nave. For a duke's wedding in the parish church of Bath, I would expect at minimum 7. Perhaps 8, given the window alcoves." She tilted her head. Was there a budget consideration? 2 matrons in the second pew audibly failed to suppress their responses. Arthur found his voice properly, which took a moment longer than he would have preferred. "Lady Clara." He said it with the careful pronunciation of a man choosing each word like a man choosing his footing on uncertain ground. I was not informed." "No," Clara agreed pleasantly. "You were not. That was rather the point." Richard, beside her, had the expression of an older brother who had spent several months being told this plan would work by his younger sister and was currently experiencing the satisfaction of being right and having the grace not to say so immediately. The House of Sterling, the vicar said, from the altar, in the quiet voice of a man reading aloud to make something real. The Cornish sterlings. He looked up at Arthur. Your Grace, I believe you are acquainted with the sterling shipping interests. Every person in the church with any interest in commerce, which was most of them, because they were Georgian English aristocrats and commerce was what kept the aristocracy running regardless of what the aristocracy said about commerce, knew the sterling shipping interests. The sterling fleet ran from Cornwall to the colonies and back, had been running for 90 years, and had survived wars and weather and the general uncertainty of the Atlantic with the stubborn persistence of something that had decided to exist and was not going to be persuaded otherwise. The sterling fortune was the kind of fortune that made other fortunes feel self-conscious. Arthur knew the sterling shipping interests. Arthur had not, until approximately 4 minutes ago, known that the governess he had been betrothed to for 6 months had any connection to them whatsoever. Lady Eleanor stood up from the pew. This was a mistake, though she did not know this yet. This is a performance, she announced, to the church. She's a fraud. She found a costume and a piece of jewelry and walked in here to cause a scene because she can't accept. The tiara, said old Lady Marchmorn, from the third pew, in the tone of a woman who had been authenticating jewelry for 60 years and did not make mistakes about it, is the sterling diamond parure. I last saw it at the coronation of 1760, worn by the late Lady Margaret Sterling. She looked at Eleanor over her spectacles. It is not a costume, my dear. Eleanor's mouth opened. The flower arrangements, Clara said, to the congregation at large, I genuinely cannot let go of. 7, minimum. 8 with the alcoves. Make a note, someone, for future reference. Clara. Arthur's voice had changed. The public voice, the composed, certain, slightly cold one, was doing something it was not used to doing, which was cracking, not dramatically, but at the edges, in the way that very controlled things crack when they encounter something they were not built to withstand. I need you to, can we? I think, Clara said, looking at him with the clear, measuring expression of a woman who has decided something, that we've been quite public enough for one morning, don't you? She turned to the congregation, who were watching with the concentrated attention of people who had not expected a return on their attendance of this magnitude. Thank you all for coming. The wedding of the Duke of Westcliff is, I'm afraid, cancelled. The flowers alone disqualify it. She looked at the vicar. You'll want to reschedule your afternoon, I imagine. Yes, the vicar said, with the adaptability of a man whose profession had prepared him for the full range of human behavior. Indeed. Clara turned and walked back up the aisle. Her gown moved with her in silver and ivory, and the congregation, almost as one, watched her go. Eleanor, at the front of the church, said several things in a volume and vocabulary that the official church record would later describe simply as outburst of an uncultured nature, before Lady Marchmorn, in the third pew, said sit down, Eleanor in a voice that had the effect of a full stop on a sentence, and Eleanor Saturday. Arthur stood at the altar of St. Jude's Parish Church in his expensive coat, unmarried, staring at the doors through which Clara had just exited. The vicar closed his prayer book. Shall I? Penworth said. He had come as a guest, standing at the back, and had moved forward with the quiet competence of a man who understood his function in moments like this. Bring the carriage around, Your Grace? Not yet, Arthur said. He was still looking at the door. 3. The estate at Thornfield Park, which was the principal sterling property in the county and which Arthur had not previously known existed, was precisely what the sterling fortune suggested it would be. The grounds ran for 2 miles in the direction of the hills. The house itself was built in the previous century with the confident extravagance of people who had decided that if you were going to build something, you should build it as though it were going to last, and the gardens were currently full of people. Arthur arrived on a Tuesday. He had spent 4 days after the church managing the social consequences of what the Ton was already calling the Westcliff reversal, which was the kind of name that attached itself to events and did not let go. Lady Eleanor had departed Bath for her cousin's estate in Kent, accompanied by the particular social atmosphere that follows a woman who has been heard using language of that nature in a parish church. Arthur's solicitor had confirmed the sterling lineage 3 separate times, less because he doubted it and more because the scale of the sterling fortune required some time to comprehend. And then he had come here, because there was nowhere else logical to go. The garden party appeared to have been assembled with the specific purpose of making Arthur's arrival as publicly inconvenient as possible, which he suspected had been organized by Richard Sterling, who had the manner of a man who enjoyed logistics. There were at least 40 guests distributed across 3 lawn areas, a quartet playing under a cedar tree, a game of blindman's buff in enthusiastic progress on the south lawn, and he counted 6 young lords in various states of attempting to be charming in Clara's immediate vicinity. Clara was in the center of the main lawn in a dress the color of sage that suited her in a way the silver wedding gown had suited her differently, not as armor, but as herself, which was somehow more formidable. She was laughing at something one of the lords had said, a real laugh, the kind he recognized from 6 months of having it directed at him. It was currently not being directed at him. Richard appeared at Arthur's elbow with the unhurried precision of someone who had been watching the gate. "Your Grace," he said. "Sterling," Arthur said. "Clara is engaged until 3 o'clock, Richard said. "She has asked me to tell you that you're welcome to join the party and she'll speak with you when she's free. She's also asked me to tell you that Lord Pemberton is explaining his views on maritime law to her right now, and that you may find this relevant." Arthur looked at Lord Pemberton, who was young and had good teeth and was currently explaining something with considerable animation. "And what," Arthur said carefully, "is required to be spoken to before 3 o'clock?" Richard's expression was that of a man who has been told by his sister exactly what to say in this situation and is following the instructions to the letter because he respects both the instructions and the outcome they are designed to produce. "Blindman's buff," he said. "They need another player." The blindman's buff game on the south lawn was presided over by a group of older guests, 6 women of the Lady Marchmorn vintage who had positioned their chairs in a comfortable semicircle and were watching the proceedings with the focused enjoyment of people who knew they were witnessing something worth watching. When Arthur appeared at the edge of the lawn, 3 of them said nothing but 4 of them smiled in the identical way. The handkerchief was produced. He wore it, because refusing would have been a different kind of humiliation. He played the game, blindfolded, on Clara's lawn, among her guests, reaching for people who moved neatly out of his way with the cheerful cruelty of people who were enjoying this enormously. He caught no one for 6 minutes. The older ladies applauded his efforts. Then someone was close, he could tell by the sound, and the air, and something less definable, and he reached, and caught a wrist, and knew immediately. He took the handkerchief off. Clara looked at him with her head slightly tilted and the expression he had spent 4 days thinking about, the one that was amused and clear and entirely unimpressed and somehow, despite being entirely unimpressed, still completely and ruinously engaged. "You caught me," she said. "Disappointing. I'm usually faster." "Clara," he said. The game had gone quiet around them, the other players finding reasons to be elsewhere with the helpful discretion of people who understood the moment. "I need to speak to you." "You are speaking to me. Privately." She looked at him for a moment. Then she extracted her wrist from his grip with a deliberateness that was not unkind but was entirely on her own terms. "After the dance," she said. "There's a country dance at 4. You'll partner me for it." He had not danced a country dance since he was 20. It showed in his face. "It has a figure where the partners hold hands," Clara said, with the mild interest of a woman sharing incidental information. "I've been told it requires a degree of coordination." She looked at him serenely. "I imagine you'll manage." She went back to her guests. He stayed for the dance. He was, as she had accurately predicted, not immediately graceful at the figures, and the older ladies watched with a satisfaction so thorough it was practically architectural. Clara danced with the ease of a woman in her own house doing something she enjoyed, and when the figure brought their hands together she gave no sign that the contact was anything other than the ordinary choreography of the dance. His hand disagreed, and he could not make it stop. 4. The conservatory was at the west end of the house, built in glass and iron with the particular Victorian optimism about growing things in England that requires either genuine faith or a very good heating system. At 10:30 it was lit by 2 oil lamps and the almost full moon pressing through the glass panes, and the night jasmine along the south wall was doing what night jasmine does in the dark, which is to say it was producing a scent so complete that the room smelled like a decision. Clara was there when he came looking. He had not expected this. He had expected to be told she was retired for the evening. She was standing at the south wall, one hand on the jasmine vine, not looking at anything in particular. "I thought you'd gone to bed," Arthur said. "I thought you'd left for the night." She did not turn immediately. "We were both wrong." He came into the room and stopped when there was a reasonable distance between them, because the distance felt important and he was aware of this. "I owe you a great number of things," he said. "An explanation is the smallest of them, but I'll start there." Clara turned. Her evening dress was dark navy, almost black, and her hair was down, which was not a detail he was going to examine further, and her face in the lamp and moonlight was the face he had spent 6 months learning and 4 days trying to relearn from a different starting position. "My father," Arthur said, "left debts. Not public ones, he was meticulous about appearances. Private ones, owed to 3 men who had the patience to wait until he was dead, and I was the one who had to answer for them." He said it without the composure he usually deployed for difficult information, because the composure had not been working for him recently. The sum was, it would have taken the Westcliff estate 20 years to recover, under normal management. Eleanor Ashford's father offered to absorb the debt entirely, in exchange for the marriage. Clara said nothing. "I agreed," he said. "Because I thought I had been telling myself for a year that what I felt for you was a complication, because you were a governess and the practical reality of the dukedom required a practical solution." He stopped. "That was not honest. What I was actually doing was being afraid that what I felt for you was real, and that real things could be lost, and that was considerably more terrifying than a debt." "You called me a penniless common nuisance," Clara said. She said it without heat, which was worse than heat, because it meant she was saying it as a fact rather than an accusation. "Yes," he said. "I know. In writing." "In writing," he agreed. "It was read by 14 people." 17. Clara said. Richard counted. Arthur was silent for a moment. "I said it because I was trying to believe it," he said. "Because I was trying to convince myself that the thing I was giving up was not that you were not." He stopped, and started again, because the sentence had too many ways to be wrong. "I was trying to make it smaller than it was. It was not small. And saying it did not make it smaller. It only made me the kind of man who says that sort of thing in writing." Clara was watching him with the assessing look, the one she had used at the altar when she had known something and he hadn't, except that now they were facing each other with roughly the same information and the assessment was of something different. "You knew I wasn't wealthy," she said. "When you proposed. You believed I had nothing." "Yes. And you proposed anyway." The question was not rhetorical. He understood this. "I proposed anyway," he said. "Because you had spent 4 months telling me when I was wrong about things, and 3 months making me think about things I hadn't thought about, and 2 months making me laugh at dinner in a way I hadn't laughed since." He stopped again. "Since before my father died." "Yes. I proposed anyway. And then I unmade it because I was afraid, and I told myself a lie about why, and I put the lie in writing, and you walked down the aisle in silver thread and showed me the cost of it in front of 200 people." He looked at her. "That was, for the record, extremely well done." Clara's expression shifted the smallest movement, a fracture in the careful surface. "Richard planned the gown," she said. "I planned everything else." It showed. He moved toward her, carefully, giving her time to decide whether the distance was closing, and stopped when he was close enough that she would have to choose to step back if she wanted space. She did not step back. "Clara. I did not propose to a fortune. I did not marry the wrong woman and correct the mistake. I did not look at your brother's documents in that church and feel relief because you turned out to be wealthy. I felt the specific horror of a man who has just understood what he threw away, and then understood that he threw it away for reasons he invented because the truth was too frightening to act on." "What is the truth?" she asked. He took her hand. He turned it over and placed it flat against his chest, over the left side of it, where his heart was doing something that was not its usual measured pace. "That," he said, "is the truth. It has been doing that since you walked into the church. It was doing it, I would submit to you, considerably before that, And I was calling it something else because calling it what it was required a courage I apparently only developed in retrospect. Clara was quiet for a long moment. She could feel his heartbeat. He had made sure she could, because there was no argument with evidence of that kind, and he had been wrong about enough things recently that he was no longer willing to be uncertain when certainty was available. A duke, Clara said, slowly, must earn a sterling heart. I know. I am not going to give you everything back simply because you've explained yourself honestly. Honesty is the starting point. It is not the destination. I know that too. You will have to prove it, she said. Not to society. To me. Privately, consistently, over time, in the way that things are actually proved rather than performed. Yes, he said. And if you write anything about me again, Clara said, I will read it. Everything I write about you from this point forward, Arthur said, will be entirely suitable for public consumption. Her hand was still against his chest. She had not moved it. The jasmine was very present in the room. The moon through the glass panes was doing its considerable best. The two lamps threw their light in warm circles and left the edges of the conservatory in productive shadow. Good night, Arthur, Clara said. She removed her hand. She walked toward the door. At the door, she stopped. The dance figure, she said, without turning. The one where partners hold hands. A pause. You managed it adequately. She left. Arthur stood in the conservatory for a moment longer than necessary. Adequately, he said, to the jasmine. He was smiling when he said it. 5. The Royal Bath Assembly Ball was the event by which the season was measured and would be remembered, and this particular season was going to be remembered for some time. Lady Eleanor had returned from Kent. This was Arthur's first mistake, people would say afterward, not preventing it. His second mistake was failing to anticipate that Eleanor's particular combination of wounded pride and social ambition required an outlet, and that the outlet it had selected was Clara. She had spent a fortnight rebuilding her social position from the Kent setback, and she had done it with the specific, targeted focus of a woman who had decided that the problem was not her behavior at the church but Clara's orchestration of it. By the time the assembly ball arrived, she had a story, polished and distributed through 3 drawing rooms, that Clara Sterling was a fraud, a social schemer, a woman who had manufactured her own lineage papers and paid for a costume tiara to humiliate a duke who had seen through her. It was a durable story in the way that durable lies are durable not because they were true but because they were structured around a fear people already had, which was the fear of being deceived by appearances, and therefore they circulated with a momentum of their own. Clara arrived at the assembly ball in deep red, not the silver armor of the church, but something warm and definite, the color of a decision already made. Her tiara was the Sterling tiara again, because it was hers and she had decided she liked wearing it. Arthur was not with her when she arrived. He had not asked to escort her. She had not expected him to yet. She was at the edge of the main room, speaking with Lady Marchmorn and 2 of her allies, when Eleanor made her entrance. It was timed for maximum audience, the peak of the evening, the room at capacity, the music between sets so that voices carried. Eleanor positioned herself at the center of the room and said, clearly enough to be heard by the people nearest her, which was by design enough people. It is remarkable, isn't it, what a talented woman can accomplish with a borrowed tiara and a willing solicitor. I almost admire the audacity. She looked across the room at Clara. Almost. The room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something is about to happen. Clara set down her glass. She did not move. She did not need to. Arthur moved. He had been at the far end of the room, talking to the Duke of Somerset, and he crossed the ballroom floor with the particular walk of a man who has made a decision and is carrying it. The room separated for him, not because he asked but because something in his bearing made it obvious that this was not a social crossing but a purposeful one, and the room, which had seen a great deal in the past 3 weeks and was prepared to see more, made way. He stopped at the center of the room. He looked at Eleanor for a moment. Then he turned to face the room. Lady Eleanor has made a claim, he said, in the carrying, level voice of a man who had been making public addresses since he was 24 and knew how to fill a room with them. I'd like to address it. He looked at Clara, across the room. 3 weeks ago, he said, I stood at an altar and made the worst decision of my life, which was to believe that what I felt for a woman of genuine intelligence and genuine character was a complication to be managed, rather than the most valuable thing I had encountered in 43 years of encountering things. He did not look away from Clara. I called her something in writing that I will spend the remainder of my life endeavoring to deserve never having said. The claim being made tonight that she is a fraud, that her lineage is manufactured, is false, demonstrably, legally, and by the word of every person in this room who examined the sterling papers and the sterling tiara and Lady Marchmorn, who authenticated it at the church. He paused. But more than that. Whether Clara Sterling had the fortune of the House of Sterling or the nothing I believed her to have, she is the most remarkable woman I have met, and I am the fool who required a public lesson in order to understand it. The room was absolutely still. He walked toward her. He stopped in front of her, and he looked at her, and she looked at him, and the assembly rooms of Bath held its collective breath. I am not doing this for the room, he said, quietly enough that the room had to lean toward it. I'm doing it because you said publicly, and in front of witnesses, and I prefer that things are stated where they can be verified. He went to one knee, which produced a sound from the room that was not quite a gasp and was not quite a cheer and was somewhere in between. Clara Sterling. I am asking you, in front of everyone currently pretending not to stare, if you will accept the apology of a duke whose pride significantly outpaced his sense, and who loves you, not your fortune, not your lineage, not the way you walked down that aisle in silver, though that particular image is going to stay with me, but you. Your particular laugh. Your wrong opinions about window placement. The way you corrected my blindman's buff technique on the 3rd attempt. He looked up at her. Your patience, which you have extended to me in quantities I do not deserve and intend to justify over time. Clara looked down at him. The room, at this point, was not pretending anything. The flower arrangements, she said. He blinked. I beg your pardon. At St. Jude's. 7, minimum. 8 with the alcoves. She held his gaze. When we marry, if we marry, the flowers will be done properly. I want that agreed in advance. 8 arrangements, Arthur said, in every window alcove. With appropriate seasonal variety. I will personally supervise the florist. You will not personally supervise the florist, Clara said. You have no eye for it. You will consult me, and I will supervise the florist. Yes, he said. That is significantly more correct. Lady Marchmorn, in the crowd, said well done to no one in particular. Clara reached down and took his hand, not to be helped up, because he didn't need helping up, but in the particular way of a person taking hold of something they have decided about. Get up, Arthur, she said. He stood. She kept his hand. Behind them, Eleanor Ashford discovered that the room had rearranged itself around the evening's actual center of gravity, which was not her, and had been left in a social location so peripheral that even her most loyal allies had quietly migrated toward the music. She left at 9:20, before the dancing began. No one noted her departure with particular attention. There were other things to attend to. The music started, a waltz, which the assembly rooms favored because it was current and because couples who were waltzing correctly were a pleasing thing to watch, and because the assembly rooms, like all rooms, preferred to end evenings on something worth seeing. Arthur danced with his right hand at Clara's waist and his left holding hers, and he was, she noted with the private honesty she kept for things she would tell him later, an excellent waltzer, which he had concealed successfully through the country dance and the blindman's buff and all of it. You can waltz, she said. I can waltz, he confirmed. You made me watch you struggle through buff. You made me play blindman's buff, he said, on your lawn, in front of 6 elderly women who have not stopped smiling since. I considered us even. We are not even, Clara said. No, Arthur agreed. We are not. We are, however, dancing. They were dancing. The room watched, because the room had been watching since a woman in silver walked down an aisle and altered the shape of the evening, and the evening was not done with them yet, and the room was not done watching. Lady Marchmorn, in her chair by the east wall, watched the Duke of Westcliff lead one figure and then, when the music shifted, watched him follow his partner's lead on the next, with the easy, unforced grace of a man who had decided where he was going and was no longer in any hurry about the direction. "Took him long enough," she said, to her companion on the left. "They always do," her companion said. "Yes," said Lady Marchmorn, and picked up her tea, and watched, and was satisfied.